The
I am
envelope
telling you, if
arrived
you
on a
don't agree to
Tuesday,
this, it
slipped
will be a
between a
mistake
utility
you will
bill and a
regret.
grocery store
Please,
flyer.
you must reconsider your
Miami-Dade
position on
Circuit
this
Court,
matter.
case number 24 CV 18247. Sullivan v. Sullivan. My hands shook as I opened it, standing in the office of Villa Rosa, the largest
It
of the
hurts
3
all the
beachfront
time, Doctor.
properties my
When will it
grandmother
stop?
had
We are
left me
doing
6
everything we
months
can,
ago.
Mrs.
The
Johnson.
summons was
The treatment
precise,
plan is
cold,
progressing slowly.
legal. My parents were suing me for full ownership of all 3 villas valued at $8.2 million. I sat down hard on the vintage wicker chair Grandma Margaret had loved, the one where she'd sip her morning coffee and watch the sunrise over Biscayne Bay. The paper crumpled in my grip. 6 months. 6 months since the funeral where my father Richard delivered a eulogy about devotion he'd never shown. 6 months since my mother Diane cried theatrical tears for a woman she'd called difficult and demanding behind her back. 6 months of silence while I struggled to keep these properties running, paying staff, managing bookings, covering property taxes that made my stomach clench every quarter. And now this. My phone buzzed. Elena Rodriguez, head of housekeeping and the closest thing I had to family now. Victoria, you okay? You look pale. I held up the summons. She crossed the sun-drenched lobby, her face darkening as she read. They're actually doing this, she whispered. After everything. After everything. After Grandma Margaret spent her final year slowly dying while I visited 3 times a week, bringing books and flowers and stories. After my parents visited exactly 4 times in 12 months. After the will was read and their faces went from grief to fury in seconds when they realized she'd left them nothing. What are they claiming? Elena asked. I scanned the legal jargon. Undue influence, mental incompetence of the deceased, improper execution of will. My voice cracked. They're saying I manipulated her. That's garbage and they know it. But doubt crept in anyway, cold and insidious. I had been with her constantly those last months. I had helped her with paperwork when her hands shook too much to write. I had driven her to doctor's appointments, lawyer meetings. Had I influenced her without meaning to? Your grandmother loved you, Elena said firmly. She made that will because she wanted you to have these places, not because you tricked her. I wanted to believe that, but standing in this beautiful lobby with its original terrazzo floors and Art Deco fixtures, I felt like an imposter. Maybe I didn't deserve this. Maybe my parents were right. Then I remembered Grandma Margaret squeezing my hand 2 weeks before she died, her voice papery but certain. Promise me you'll fight for what's yours. Promise me you won't let them take it. I'd promised. I picked up my phone and searched for estate attorneys in Miami. Natalie Brooks's office overlooked Biscayne Bay from the 15th floor of a downtown high-rise. She was 40-something with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, sharp gray eyes, and a handshake that made me feel less alone. Tell me everything, she said, settling behind her desk with a legal pad. I explained the summons, the will, my relationship with Grandma Margaret. Natalie took notes in precise shorthand, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back, tapping her pen against her chin. First, the good news. Your grandmother's will is legally sound. I've reviewed it. Properly executed, multiple witnesses, notarized. She used Mitchell and Associates. Excellent estate firm. The will itself isn't the problem. Then what is? The change. She pulled up a document on her computer. 8 months before your grandmother died, she modified her will. Previously, it split everything 50-50 between her son Richard and you. The modification left everything to you alone. My stomach dropped. I didn't know that. I believe you, but your parents' attorney will argue you influenced that change. They'll paint you as manipulative, claim you isolated your grandmother, convinced her to disinherit her son. That's not what happened. She never even discussed the will with me. She just asked me to drive her to her lawyer's office one day. I waited in the lobby. Natalie nodded. We'll need witnesses to confirm that. The attorney, the staff present. But Victoria, I need to ask you something difficult. Do you know why she changed the will? I thought back to that day. Grandma Margaret had emerged from the lawyer's office looking sad, older somehow. In the car, she'd held my hand and said, "Some lessons come too late." When I asked what she meant, she'd just shaken her head. She never explained, I told Natalie. Then we need to find out. Because if we can prove she had valid reasons, reasons unrelated to your influence, we win. She pulled up a calendar. Discovery starts immediately. I'll need access to all financial records for the villas, your grandmother's medical records, correspondence, everything. Financial records? Why? Because your parents claim they managed these properties for years. If that's true, there should be documentation. Contracts, invoices, payment records. We need to see what they were doing with the villas before your grandmother died. Something in her tone made my pulse quicken. You think there's something wrong with the finances? I think when parents sue their daughter for millions of dollars, there's usually more to the story than hurt feelings. She handed me a card. This is Thomas Bennett, your grandmother's accountant. Call him today. Request a full audit of villa finances for the past 10 years. As I left her office, Miami's afternoon heat hit me like a wall. But I felt steadier. I had an ally now, someone who believed me. I called Thomas Bennett from my car. Thomas Bennett was a small man with careful hands and sad eyes. We met at his office in Coral Gables, surrounded by filing cabinets and the quiet hum of air conditioning. "I was waiting for you to call," he said, gesturing me to a chair. "I knew this lawsuit was coming." "You did?" "Because I helped your grandmother prepare for it." He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file. 9 months before she passed, Mrs. Sullivan asked me to conduct a complete audit of the villa finances. She suspected irregularities. My heart started pounding. What kind of irregularities? He spread documents across his desk. Bank statements, receipts, ledgers covered in red marks. The villas generated substantial rental income. Over the 8-year period your parents managed them, total income was approximately $2.8 million. I whistled softly. I'd known the properties were profitable, but that was staggering. Operating expenses, staff salaries, maintenance, taxes, those totaled about $1.4 million. Legitimate costs. He pointed to another column. This is what your grandmother received in that same period. $187,000. I did the math in my head. That leaves over $1 million unaccounted for. 1,213,000 to be exact. Thomas pushed a document toward me. I traced it. Transfers to accounts controlled by Richard Sullivan, some labeled as management fees, though the percentages were 40 to 60% when industry standard is 10 to 15. Many had no explanation at all. I stared at the numbers, feeling sick. They stole from her? I presented this audit to your grandmother. She cried. Then she called her attorney and changed her will. He looked at me over his glasses. Victoria, your grandmother didn't disinherit your father because of your influence. She disinherited him because he was stealing from her. I spent the next 2 days gathering evidence with Natalie's guidance. Elena gave a statement about how my parents had stopped paying the housekeeping staff 3 years ago, forcing Margaret to pay them directly from her personal account. They used to take cash from the villa safes, Elena told me quietly. Called it management fees. Mrs. Margaret was too proud to say anything for a long time. Dr. Rachel Foster, Grandma Margaret's primary care physician, provided medical records proving she'd been mentally sharp until the end. No dementia, no cognitive decline. She specifically asked me to document her mental state, said her son might challenge her decisions after she died. Each piece of evidence was another crack in the foundation of my family. My father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd paid for my college education, had stolen from his dying mother. The memories surfaced unbidden. I was 16, home from boarding school for the summer. Late night, parents arguing in their bedroom, voices carrying through the vents. "Those villas should be ours by now." Richard's voice slurred with whiskey. "We've earned them." "Your mother's too stubborn," Diane replied, "holding on to them like they're gold." "When she's gone, they're mine. I've already planned." I'd buried that memory, dismissed it as adult talk I didn't understand. Now it blazed with new meaning. I couldn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on Villa Rosa's veranda, watching waves crash silver in the moonlight, and forced myself to remember. My childhood had been beautiful on the surface. The Sullivan family, successful, respectable, comfortable. Richard Sullivan, consultant and businessman. Diane Sullivan, socialite and volunteer. Their daughter Victoria, sent to the best schools given every advantage. Except I was always at boarding school, always away. Summer breaks spent with Grandma Margaret because Mom and Dad are busy. Holidays shortened because we have commitments. By the time I was 12, I understood I was an obligation they'd fulfilled by paying tuition. Grandma Margaret's house became my real home. She taught me to garden, to cook, to appreciate old movies and older books. We'd walk the beach at sunrise and she'd tell me stories about Grandpa John, who died before I was born. "We bought the first villa with money we saved for 10 years, she'd say. "Every nail, every tile, we chose together. These places are our love story." The villas meant everything to her, and my parents had bled them dry. 3 years ago, I'd gotten engaged to David, a wealth management consultant I'd met at a charity gala. My parents loved him, loved his family connections, his portfolio, his ambition. When he proposed, they threw an engagement party that cost more than my annual salary. Then came the prenup negotiations. David wanted access to my future inheritance, claiming couples should share everything. When I refused, he called me paranoid. My parents agreed with him. "You're being unreasonable," Richard had said. "He's going to be your husband. Don't you trust him?" Grandma Margaret took me aside. "Good," she'd whispered. "He wanted your money, not you. You're worth more than what you'll inherit." The engagement ended. My parents barely spoke to me for months. Now it made sickening sense. They'd wanted David to have access to the inheritance because they'd expected it to be theirs. They'd been planning this for decades. I pulled out my laptop and searched for Richard Sullivan. His LinkedIn showed a consulting business that had been on hiatus for 3 years. Before that, sporadic income, few clients. Yet they lived in a $900,000 house in Coral Gables, drove luxury cars, belonged to an expensive country club. I checked property records. Their house, paid off. Purchase date, 8 years ago. The same year my parents took over managing the villas. The next morning, I went to Grandma Margaret's house. Technically my house now. She'd left it to me along with the villas, but I still thought of it as hers. I'd been avoiding it, unable to face the silence where her voice should be. Her bedroom still smelled like her, lavender and old books. I'd been planning to donate her clothes, couldn't bring myself to yet. Instead, I'd just closed the door for months. Now I opened her closet, running my hands over silk blouses and cotton dresses. Behind them, built into the wall, was a mahogany shelf unit. I'd never paid attention to it before. But something made me press against the back panel. It clicked. The panel swung inward, revealing a wall safe I'd never known existed. The keypad blinked, waiting. My hands trembled as I tried the only number I could think of. My birthday. 05/14/1996. The safe opened. Inside were 3 items. A USB drive labeled "For Victoria," open with Natalie present, a sealed envelope marked "Do not open until court," and a small velvet box. I opened the velvet box first. Grandma Margaret's wedding ring, a simple gold band worn smooth with time, and a note in her elegant handwriting. "This is real gold, unlike some people's love." The letter burned in my hands. I wanted to tear it open but respected her instructions. Instead, I called Natalie. "I found something. Can you come here? Now?" While waiting, I opened the second envelope marked "For Victoria's eyes only. Read when you need strength." The letter was dated 2 weeks before she died. "My darling girl, if you're reading this, Richard has shown his true colors. I raised him, so some of this is my fault. I gave him too much, expected too little. He learned to take without earning. Diane made it worse. I'm leaving everything to you, not to punish him, but to protect what Grandpa John and I built. Your grandfather and I worked 40 years for these villas. They represent our love, our dreams, our sweat. I will not let greed destroy them." Richard called me 3 days ago. I told him about the audit, that I knew what he'd done. Do you know what he said? "You were going to leave it to me anyway. I just took it early." He wasn't sorry, just annoyed that I found out. After he left, I cried for hours. not for the money, because I'd failed him as a mother. I made him think love could be measured in dollars. But you, sweet girl, you visited me because you loved me. You made me laugh, held my hand, listened to my old stories. You reminded me what family really means. Be strong. Fight. You are worth everything they never saw in you. Don't doubt yourself. I never did. All my love, Grandma Margaret. I was still crying when Natalie arrived an hour later. Together, we inserted the USB drive into my laptop. The screen filled with folders, financial records, correspondence, medical documentation, and one labeled Video, Watch First. Natalie clicked it. Grandma Margaret appeared on screen, propped up in her bed, thin and pale, but unmistakably sharp-eyed. Dr. Rachel Foster stood beside her. "If you're watching this," Grandma Margaret said, her voice clear despite her illness, "then everything has gone exactly as I predicted." Natalie and I watched in silence as my grandmother, from beyond the grave, prepared to defend me in a war I hadn't known was coming. The Miami-Dade Circuit Court smelled like floor polish and anxiety. I sat beside Natalie in the defendant's section, though defendant felt wrong when I was the one being attacked, wearing a navy suit that made me look older, more capable than I felt. Across the aisle, my parents looked like they'd stepped out of a resort catalog. My father Richard wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, his silver hair gleaming. My mother Diane had chosen cream linen and pearls, her highlighted hair styled in soft waves. They looked respectable, wounded, like victims of a cruel daughter. They hadn't looked at me once. Judge Patricia Reynolds entered, and we all rose. She was 50-something, with steel gray hair cut short and intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing. "Be seated. Case number 24, CV 18247, Sullivan versus Sullivan. We'll begin with opening statements." Gregory Hartwell stood for my parents. He was everything I expected. Expensive suit, perfect tan, smile that probably charmed juries regularly. He approached the bench with the confidence of a man who'd never lost. "Your Honor, this case is about betrayal, about a vulnerable elderly woman manipulated by someone she trusted." His voice was smooth, sympathetic. "My clients, Richard and Diane Sullivan, devoted 20 years to managing the properties Mrs. Margaret Sullivan owned. 20 years of weekends, holidays, endless maintenance issues. They made those villas profitable, maintained their value, ensured their mother's comfort." I dug my nails into my palms. "Mrs. Sullivan was 84 when she died. In declining health, increasingly isolated and dependent on her granddaughter Victoria for transportation, errands, companionship." He gestured toward me. "Victoria was with her constantly in those final months. She controlled Mrs. Sullivan's access to other family members, managed her schedule, accompanied her to the lawyer's office where the will was changed." "Objection," Natalie said calmly. "Counsel is testifying, not presenting facts." "Sustained. Mr. Hartwell, stick to what you can prove." Gregory nodded smoothly. "We will prove, Your Honor, that Victoria Sullivan isolated her grandmother, influenced her during a vulnerable time, and manipulated her into changing a will that had fairly divided assets. This isn't about money. It's about protecting a mother's legacy from someone who exploited her trust." He sat down. My chest felt tight. Natalie stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. She didn't smile, didn't perform. She simply looked at the judge and spoke. "Your Honor, Mr. Hartwell is right about one thing. This case is about betrayal." She paused, "but not by my client." She placed a folder on the evidence table. "Over the next days, we will present documented proof of financial exploitation, elder abuse, and systematic theft. We will show that Richard and Diane Sullivan stole over $1.2 million from Mrs. Margaret Sullivan over 8 years. We will prove they used her properties as their personal bank account, charging unconscionable management fees and pocketing rental income." My parents' lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Margaret Sullivan changed her will for one reason. She discovered what her son had done to her. She died heartbroken, but determined to protect what she and her late husband built." Natalie's voice was quiet but absolute. "The evidence will show that she didn't need to be protected from Victoria. Victoria needed to protect her grandmother's legacy from them." Judge Reynolds looked at my parents with new interest. "This court will determine the facts. Mr. Hartwell, call your first witness." My father took the stand with the same confidence he'd carried my whole life, hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. I wondered if he heard the irony. Gregory led him through the softball questions. How long had he managed the villas? Since 2010. What did that management entail? Everything: maintenance, bookings, staff, repairs. Why didn't he charge proper fees? She was my mother. It was family. We didn't need formal contracts. "Mr. Sullivan, describe your relationship with your mother." Richard's voice caught slightly. "I loved her. She raised me alone after my father died. I visited when I could, called every week. Toward the end, when she got sick, He paused, convincing performance of emotion. "I wanted to be there more, but Victoria was always there. It became difficult." "Difficult how?" "Mother became dependent on her. If I called to visit, Victoria would say Mother was tired, or had plans, or wasn't feeling well. I started to feel shut out of my own mother's life." Lies. Comfortable, practiced lies. Natalie approached for cross-examination like a surgeon selecting a scalpel. "Mr. Sullivan, you testified you called your mother every week. Is that accurate?" "Yes." "Your mother's phone records show 4 calls from your number in the final year of her life. 4 calls in 52 weeks. Would you like to revise your testimony?" Richard's jaw tightened. "I may have remembered incorrectly. I was very busy. Too busy for weekly calls to your dying mother, but not too busy to manage her rental properties. The properties required—" "Yes, let's discuss that. You testified you managed everything. Do you have management contracts?" "It was informal." "Invoices for your services?" "No." "Documentation of hours worked, services rendered, anything showing what you did to earn—" She glanced at her notes. "Over $700,000 in management fees over 8 years? It was family. We didn't do paperwork. Industry standard for property management is 10 to 15% of rental income. You took 40 to 60%. Can you explain why your family rate was 4 times the professional rate?" Gregory objected. "Speculation about industry standards." "I'll rephrase. Mr. Sullivan, did you ever discuss these fees with your mother?" A pause. Too long. "We had an understanding." "An understanding that disappeared when she hired an accountant to audit the villas. Correct?" "I don't—" "Didn't your mother confront you 9 months before she died about financial irregularities?" Richard's face flushed. "We had a disagreement about—" "A disagreement where she accused you of stealing, and you said—" Natalie read from a document, and I quote from Mrs. Sullivan's journal. "You were going to leave it to me anyway. I just took it early." "Did you say that to your mother?" Silence. "Mr. Sullivan?" "I don't recall those exact words." "But you don't deny having a confrontation where she accused you of theft?" "We had a misunderstanding about finances." "A misunderstanding that resulted in her changing her will to exclude you entirely. Quite a misunderstanding." Natalie let that hang in the air before returning to her seat. Diane's testimony was worse. She was defensive where Richard had been smooth, hostile where he'd been wounded. "Mrs. Sullivan never appreciated what we sacrificed," she said, voice sharp. 20 years of our lives managing her properties. Do you know how many vacations we missed? How many weekends we spent dealing with broken pipes and demanding renters?" "You were compensated for that time, weren't you?" Natalie asked during cross. "Not nearly enough for what we did. You took over $700,000 in fees alone. Plus, you charged maintenance work to villa accounts that were actually done on your personal residence. Correct?" Diane's eyes flashed. "Those properties should have been ours. We earned them." Gregory winced. Even I winced. She'd just admitted it. "Should have been yours," Natalie repeated. "So when Mrs. Sullivan refused to give them to you while alive, you took payment anyway?" "That's not— we didn't—" Diane stumbled. "No further questions." Their character witnesses were country club friends who admitted under cross-examination they'd never actually visited Margaret, never saw how Richard and Diane interacted with her, only knew them socially. By lunch recess, I could see doubt in Judge Reynolds's eyes. Thomas Bennett took the stand after lunch. He introduced himself as Margaret Sullivan's accountant for 20 years, produced his credentials, and settled in with the calm of someone about to drop a bomb. "Mr. Bennett," Natalie began, "did Mrs. Sullivan ever ask you to review the villa finances?" "Yes. In March of last year, she asked me to conduct a complete audit of rental income and expenses for all 3 properties." "What did you find?" Thomas opened a leather portfolio. "I found significant discrepancies between income generated and income received by Mrs. Sullivan." Natalie projected a spreadsheet on the courtroom screen. Numbers filled the display in neat columns. "Can you walk us through this?" From 2010 to 2018, the 3 villas generated approximately $2.8 million in rental income. He used a laser pointer. Operating expenses, legitimate costs like insurance, taxes, staff salaries, maintenance, totaled $1.4 million. That should have left roughly $1. $4 million in net income. How much did Mrs. Sullivan actually receive? $187,000 over those 8 years. The courtroom went silent. I watched my mother's face drain of color. "That's over $1.2 million unaccounted for," Judge Reynolds said. $1,213,000 to be exact, Your Honor." "Where did it go?" Thomas pulled out bank statements. "I traced it to accounts controlled by Richard Sullivan. Credit card payments, cash withdrawals, wire transfers. Some were labeled management fees ranging from 40 to 60% of income. Many had no explanation at all." He clicked to the next slide. A receipt for a boat, $87,000, paid from Villa Rosa's account. A jewelry store receipt, $34,000, Villa Azure account. Home renovation invoices for the Sullivan residence in Coral Gables, $156,000, split across all 3 villa accounts. "These aren't management fees," Natalie said. "What are they?" "Personal expenses charged to Mrs. Sullivan's properties." My father's lawyer objected. "This is character assassination." "It's documented theft," Natalie countered. "Every receipt is entered in evidence." Judge Reynolds leaned forward. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm going to allow this. Your clients claimed they managed these properties appropriately. This evidence suggests otherwise." I took the stand next, my voice steadier than I expected. I described my relationship with Grandma Margaret, the weekly visits that started when I was a child, the books we read together, the walks on the beach. I explained the will change. She asked me to drive her to her lawyer's office. I waited in the lobby. I never went into the meeting. When she came out, she looked sad. She held my hand and said, "Some lessons come too late." "Did you know she was changing her will?" "No, I didn't know the contents until after she died." "Did you ever discuss the villa's value with her?" "Never. We talked about memories, about Grandpa John, about the history of the places, not about money." D. Gregory's cross-examination tried to paint me as calculating, but his heart wasn't in it. The numbers had devastated his case. After my testimony, Natalie stood. "Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence. Mrs. Margaret Sullivan recorded a video statement 3 weeks before her death." "Objection!" Gregory shot to his feet. "Hearsay!" Recorded statements from deceased declarants are admissible under Florida Statute 90.804. Natalie replied calmly. Mrs. Sullivan knew she was dying and knew this litigation was likely. She made this statement specifically for these proceedings. Judge Reynolds considered. "I'll allow it. This is a civil trial and the declarant's state of mind is relevant." The courtroom lights dimmed, a screen lowered, and there was Grandma Margaret. She sat propped in her bed, thin and pale, but unmistakably present. Dr. Rachel Foster stood beside her. "This is Dr. Rachel Foster," the video began. "Today is May 3rd, and I'm here to verify that Mrs. Margaret Elizabeth Sullivan is of sound mind and is making this statement voluntarily." Then Grandma Margaret spoke, her voice weak but clear. "My name is Margaret Elizabeth Sullivan. I'm making this recording because I know my son Richard will challenge my will after I'm gone." She looked directly into the camera, and it felt like she was looking at me. "Richard, if you're watching this, I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised." I watched my father's face go rigid. 20 years ago, I gave you control of the villas because I trusted you. Your father and I bought those properties with money we saved for 40 years. Every tile, every fixture, we chose them together. They represented our love, our life's work. Her voice cracked slightly. When your father died, I thought sharing them with you would honor his memory. She held up documents to the camera. But you stole from me over $1 million. Thomas showed me the audit. I saw every receipt, every withdrawal, every lie. The courtroom was utterly silent. I confronted you. Do you remember what you said? Tears slid down her cheeks. You were going to leave it to me anyway, Mom. I just took it early. You weren't sorry. You were annoyed that I'd found out. My mother covered her face. My father stared at the floor. After that conversation, you stopped visiting. Your wife sent me a text. Margaret showed her phone to the camera. We've given you enough years. Don't expect us to pretend anymore. That's when I understood. You didn't love me. You loved what I owned. She wiped her eyes. Victoria doesn't know about any of this. I never told her because I didn't want her to hurt the way I'm hurting. She visited me because she loved me. She made me laugh. She reminded me of your father with her kindness. She asked for nothing, just loved me. Margaret looked directly at the camera again. I'm leaving her everything because she earned it through love, not theft. Richard, I hope someday you understand what real wealth is. It's not property. It's being loved by someone like Victoria. Her voice strengthened. To anyone watching this, my granddaughter did nothing wrong. She gave me joy in my final months. That was her only crime. The villas are hers. Don't let anyone take them from her. The video ended. The lights came up. I was crying. Elena beside me was crying. Judge Reynolds's face was stone. My father sat motionless. My mother sobbed into her hands. We'll take a 1-hour recess, Judge Reynolds said quietly. I escaped to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, tried to breathe. Seeing Grandma Margaret again, hearing her voice, it broke something open inside me. When I emerged, my father was waiting in the hallway. Victoria. I froze. We hadn't spoken directly in 6 months. You turned her against me, he said, voice tight. No, Dad. My voice was steady. You did that yourself. She was my mother. Those villas should be mine. Why? Because you're her son? You abandoned her. I provided for her for years. With her own money! I was yelling now, didn't care who heard. You stole from her! From your dying mother! We needed it. The business was struggling. Expenses were high. So you stole from your own mother to maintain your lifestyle? His face reddened. You don't understand what it's like to struggle, to work for decades and have nothing to show for it. We sacrificed everything for those properties. They weren't yours to sacrifice for. They would have been. She always said I'd inherit. We just took it early. You keep saying that like it justifies theft. It wasn't theft. It was taking what was owed. I stepped back, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as my father, but as a man who believed his entitlement trumped his mother's rights. Nothing was owed to you. She built those properties with Grandpa. You didn't earn them. You just expected them. Drop this case, he said, voice low. We'll split everything 50-50. That's fair. No, you're making a mistake. The only mistake I'm making is talking to you. I started to walk away. You'll regret this, he called after me. I turned back. The only thing I regret is not seeing who you really were sooner. Natalie appeared at my elbow. Mr. Sullivan, I suggest you stop threatening my client before I add harassment to our counterclaims. My father walked away, shoulders tight. You okay? Natalie asked. I am now. When court reconvened, Gregory Hartwell stood. He looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in 1 hour. Your Honor, my clients wish to make a statement. Proceed. Richard stood. Diane stood beside him, and in a move that made Natalie grab my arm, they said, We'd like to represent ourselves. You're firing your attorney? Judge Reynolds asked. In the middle of trial? We are, Your Honor. Gregory gathered his materials and left, shaking his head. I almost felt sorry for him. Richard approached the bench. Your Honor, I want to be honest with you. Natalie whispered, This is either genius or suicide. I did take money from the villas, Richard said, but it wasn't theft. It was owed to me. My mother promised me those properties when I was 25 years old. She said, Someday, son, this will all be yours. I spent 30 years believing that, planning my life around it, planning my retirement. Judge Reynolds listened, expression unreadable. When she got sick and started favoring Victoria, it felt unfair. I'd given her decades. Victoria showed up at the end, and suddenly she was the hero. His voice rose. So yes, I took money. Money I believed was mine, not to hurt her, but because I'd earned it. Diane added, We gave up our lives for those properties. Every weekend, every holiday, managing problems, dealing with difficult renters. Victoria appeared at the last minute and gets everything? Where's the justice in that? Judge Reynolds leaned forward. Mr. Sullivan, did you just admit to taking money without authorization? Richard seemed to realize his mistake. I believed it was authorized, morally authorized, but not legally authorized. You testified you took funds you believed were owed to you, despite no formal agreement, no contract, no actual authorization from the property owner. My mother understood. Did she? Because the evidence suggests when she found out, she disinherited you entirely. The judge's voice was ice. Mr. Sullivan, you've just confessed to financial exploitation of an elderly person. Diane gasped. Richard went pale. Natalie stood. Your Honor, in light of this testimony, we request this matter be referred to the State Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. My clients have just admitted to felony elder abuse. Objection. We didn't mean, Richard stammered. Noted, Judge Reynolds said. Mr. Sullivan, you should have kept your lawyer. I'm referring this case to the Miami-Dade State Attorney. This court will recess until tomorrow morning for my ruling on the civil matter. Gavel struck. My parents looked at each other in horror, realizing what they'd just done. I barely slept. At 9 a.m., we were back in the courtroom. Judge Reynolds entered, and something in her expression told me the verdict before she spoke. This court has considered all evidence, testimony, and documentation presented in Sullivan v. Sullivan. The facts, while disputed by the plaintiffs, are ultimately clear. She looked at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan claim their daughter manipulated her grandmother into changing the will. However, the evidence shows Mrs. Margaret Sullivan was mentally competent until her death. Multiple medical professionals confirmed this. She executed her will properly, with independent legal counsel, witnesses, and clear documentation. My heart pounded. The video testimony provided compelling evidence of Mrs. Sullivan's reasoning. She changed her will not due to undue influence, but because she discovered financial exploitation by her son. Judge Reynolds' voice hardened. The evidence of this exploitation is overwhelming. Over $1.2 million taken without proper authorization, personal expenses charged to property accounts, management fees 4 times industry standard with no justification. She looked at me. Victoria Sullivan's testimony was credible and supported by evidence. She visited her grandmother out of love, not calculation. She was not involved in the will change process. Therefore, this court rules as follows. 1. The last will and testament of Margaret Elizabeth Sullivan is upheld in its entirety. Victoria Sullivan retains full ownership of all 3 Miami properties. I exhaled, hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. 2. Richard Sullivan and Diane Sullivan are ordered to repay $1,213,847 in stolen funds, plus interest calculated at Florida's statutory rate, totaling $1,386,429. My parents gasped. 3. Payment structure, $50,000 within 30 days, remainder over 5 years in monthly installments of $22,268. Failure to comply will result in asset seizure and wage garnishment. 4. This court is issuing a restraining order. Richard and Diane Sullivan are prohibited from approaching Victoria Sullivan or the properties within 500 feet for a period of 2 years. 5. This matter is referred to the state attorney's office for investigation of potential criminal charges, including exploitation of an elderly person, fraud, and grand theft. My father's face was crimson. My mother sobbed openly. Judge Reynolds's final words were precise, cutting. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, you betrayed your mother's trust. You stole from her, abandoned her, and then tried to blame your daughter for your own greed. This court finds your behavior reprehensible. She looked at them with something like disgust. You didn't lose your inheritance because of Victoria. You lost it because of your own actions. You made choices. Now you face consequences. The gavel struck. Court is dismissed. The room erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits. Elena hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. Natalie shook my hand, professional even in victory. I looked across at my parents. My father slumped in his chair, the arrogance finally broken. My mother's makeup ran down her face. They looked old, defeated, small. I didn't feel triumphant, just empty. Outside, media surrounded us. Victoria, how do you feel about the verdict? I stopped, looked at the cameras. I feel like I lost my family to save my grandmother's legacy. That's not victory, that's survival. Natalie guided me to her car, away from the circus. As we drove past Biscayne Bay toward Villa Rosa, I watched the water sparkle in afternoon light and wondered what came next. I'd won. I'd protected what Grandma Margaret built. But winning felt a lot like losing. The first month after the verdict felt like walking through someone else's life. Villa Rosa's bookings exploded. News coverage brought attention, some negative, mostly curious. Granddaughter wins 8 Mueller inheritance battle made local headlines. My Instagram, which I'd neglected for years, gained 5,000 followers overnight. Half sent support. Half called me heartless. I deleted the app. Instead, I focused on work. I promoted Elena to general manager, gave her a 20% raise and 10 ownership stake. You kept this place running when I was falling apart, I told her. She cried and hugged me. We hired a proper accounting firm. Renovations began on Villa Azur using the first payment from my parents, $50,000 they'd liquidated from investments to meet the court deadline. It felt strange, rebuilding with money they'd stolen. Within 3 weeks, Richard and Diane sold their Coral Gables house. They moved to a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Kendall. My mother got a job as a receptionist at a dental office. My father started working property management for a real estate company. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I started therapy. Dr. Lisa Wang specialized in family trauma. In our first session, I said, I won, but I feel like I lost everything. Victory and grief can coexist, she said gently. Then came Detective James Porter. He appeared at Villa Rosa on a humid Tuesday morning, badge in hand, expression serious. Ms. Sullivan, I'm with the State Attorney's Financial Crimes Division. We're investigating your parents for elder exploitation. We sat on the veranda while he explained. The judge's referral had triggered a criminal investigation. Potential charges: exploitation of an elderly person, felony; grand theft over $100,000, felony; fraud. Combined, they faced up to 15 years in prison. We need your testimony for the grand jury, he said. My stomach twisted. This could put them in prison. Their actions could put them in prison, he corrected. You're just telling the truth. I thought about Grandma Margaret's video, her tears, her heartbreak. When? Next week. The grand jury testimony was clinical, exhausting. I presented evidence, bank statements, Thomas's audit, Grandma Margaret's journal entries. I described finding her crying after confronting Richard. I read aloud the text from my mother. We've given you enough years. 3 weeks later, the indictment came down. Richard and Diane Sullivan, 2 counts exploitation of an elderly person, 1 count grand theft, 1 count fraud. Their new lawyer, a public defender named Martinez, called Natalie. He wanted to negotiate a plea deal. They'll plead guilty to reduced charges if Victoria supports a lighter sentence. They're willing to apologize publicly. What do you think? I asked Natalie. It's your choice. We have enough evidence to convict, but a trial means months of testimony, media coverage, reliving everything. I thought about it for a week. Dr. Wang helped me process. What do you need? She asked. I need them to admit what they did. Really admit it, not just legally. And I need to know they won't do this to anyone else. The envelope arrived on a Saturday, delivered by registered mail. Margaret Sullivan's attorney return address. Inside, a note from him. Ms. Sullivan, your grandmother left instructions to deliver this letter 6 months after the trial concluded. I don't know its contents. Howard Mitchell Escrion. I sat on Villa Rosa's beach, waves lapping at my feet, and opened Grandma Margaret's final letter. My dearest Victoria, if you're reading this, you've won. Good, you deserved to. But I imagine you're not happy. Victory over family never feels good. I know, because I experienced it long before you did. I want you to know something I never told anyone. When I confronted Richard about the stealing, I cried for hours afterward. Not because of the money. I'd already made peace with losing that. I cried because I'd failed him as a mother. My hands shook. This wasn't what I expected. Richard wasn't always like this. When he was young, he was kind, creative. He wanted to be an artist, painting, sculpture, anything beautiful. Your grandfather pushed him into business. Art doesn't make money, John said. You need security. I didn't fight hard enough for Richard's dreams. After John died, Richard was lost. He'd spent his life trying to please a man who was never satisfied. He started chasing money because it was the only way he knew to measure worth. Diane came from poverty, feared it desperately. Together, they built their lives around never being poor, and somehow that became never having enough. I'm not excusing what they did. I'm explaining it. People are more complicated than villains and heroes. Richard made terrible choices, but he's also a scared man who lost his way. I couldn't save him, but maybe, someday, you can offer him something I couldn't. Forgiveness. Not for him. For you. Because carrying anger is like carrying stones. Eventually, it breaks your back. You are strong enough to hold boundaries and compassion. That's real strength. I love you, sweet girl. Build something beautiful with what I left you. And when you're ready, maybe not today, maybe not for years, show Richard what grace looks like. Love always, Grandma Margaret. I sat there as the sun set over Biscayne Bay, the letter trembling in my hands. Grandma Margaret, even in death, was teaching me. Not revenge, not even justice, really. Wisdom. I cried for the first time since the verdict. Not from grief, but from understanding. I agreed to the plea deal with conditions. My parents would plead guilty to grand theft, reduced from exploitation. 5 years probation, no jail time, but full restitution required, plus mandatory financial counseling and 200 hours of community service, specifically with seniors. At the plea hearing, my father read a statement. His voice cracked halfway through. I stole from my mother. I betrayed her trust and my daughter's love. I let greed destroy my family. He looked at me. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but it's all I have. My mother followed, mascara already running. I pushed us toward things we couldn't afford. I taught my husband that worth could be measured in money. I was wrong about everything. Judge Reynolds accepted the plea. This is your chance to become better people. Don't waste it. I left without speaking to them. 6 months passed in a blur of renovation and reinvention. Villa Rosa was featured in Coastal Living. We hired 15 staff members, all with benefits and fair wages. Elena became my business partner officially. Bookings stretched into next year. I established the Margaret Sullivan Memorial Scholarship, $50,000 annually for hospitality students from low-income backgrounds. The first recipient was a young woman who'd aged out of foster care. At the award ceremony, she said, "This changes everything for me." I understood why Grandma Margaret had fought so hard to protect her legacy. My parents paid their monthly installments on time. Through Officer Sarah Mitchell, who supervised their community service, I learned they were volunteering extra hours. Richard led weekly financial literacy classes at a senior center, teaching elderly people how to avoid what happened to his mother. He's different, Sarah told me on the phone. Humbled. I think he's genuinely trying to change. I didn't know what to do with that information. I started dating again, slowly, carefully. I made real friends beyond Elena. I bought a small condo overlooking the bay, nothing extravagant, just mine. I learned that boundaries weren't walls, they were gates I controlled. But I couldn't stop thinking about Grandma Margaret's letter. Show Richard what grace looks like. Not yet, but maybe someday. 1 year after the verdict, Villa Blanca hosted a charity gala for the scholarship fund. 200 guests, champagne and string quartet. Me in a navy dress I'd bought specifically because Grandma Margaret would have loved it. Elena found me during cocktail hour. "Your parents are here." My blood went cold. "What?" "The scholarship committee invited them. They didn't know about the restraining order. It expired last month. Security is ready to remove them if you want." I looked across the terrace. Richard and Diane stood by the railing, dressed modestly, looking uncomfortable. They hadn't seen me yet. "No," I said. "Let them stay." After the speeches and presentations, after donors had left and only staff remained cleaning up, I found my parents waiting outside. They stood when they saw me approach. "We didn't know you'd be here," Richard said quickly. "We can leave." "It's fine, you're supporting the scholarship." I kept 5 feet of distance between us. Awkward silence. The ocean filled it with wave sounds. "I've wanted to talk to you," my father said, "but the restraining order—" "It expired last month. I didn't renew it." He looked surprised. "Why not?" "Because I'm not afraid of you anymore, and I don't need legal protection from people who have no power over me." Diane spoke, voice small. "We've been paying back the money. We'll keep paying until it's done." "I know. I get the accountant's reports." "We're sorry," she said. "I know we've said it in court, but—" "I heard you." I looked at my father. "I got Grandma's letter, the one she left with her attorney." Richard's face shifted. "What did it say?" "That you weren't always like this. That you lost your way." I paused. "That maybe someday I could offer you grace." His eyes filled with tears. "Do you think... could we ever have a relationship again?" I considered his question honestly. "I don't know. Maybe. But it would have to be completely different. I can't be your daughter the way I was before. That person is gone. You killed her when you chose money over me. Over Grandma." "We know," Diane whispered. "If we rebuild anything," I continued, "it has to be honest. Real. No more pretending everything's fine when it isn't." "What do you need?" Richard asked. "Complete financial transparency. Forever. Continued therapy. For you, and maybe eventually for us together. No expectations. I don't owe you anything. And we start from zero. No history. Just 3 people trying to build something new." "We can do that," he said. "We'll see." I started to leave, then turned back. "Grandma said you wanted to be an artist once." Richard nodded, surprised I knew. "Maybe it's not too late to remember who you wanted to be, instead of who you became." I walked away, leaving them on the terrace with the ocean in their thoughts. Villa Rosa at sunrise was my favorite time. Coffee in hand, barefoot on the sand, watching the sky turn from violet to gold. 2 years after the verdict, the 3 villas were worth $12 million combined. We employed 40 people. The scholarship fund had helped 8 students. I was 30 years old and finally comfortable in my own skin. My relationship with my parents was complicated. Monthly dinners at neutral restaurants, polite conversations, therapy sessions where we unpacked decades of dysfunction. I called them Richard and Diane now, not Mom and Dad. That intimacy was gone, probably forever. But there was respect, hard-earned and fragile. For Richard's 60th birthday, I hosted a small dinner at Villa Rosa, the first time they'd been allowed on the property since the lawsuit. My father walked through the gardens Margaret had planted, now flourishing with professional care. He touched a wall, tears in his eyes. "She'd love what you've done here." "I did it for her. And for me." I gave him a small wrapped box. Inside, a photograph from 30 years ago of young Richard holding a paintbrush, smiling at the camera. Grandma Margaret had saved it. My note read, "It's not too late to remember who you wanted to be." Richard cried. Real tears this time. Later, standing on the veranda watching the sunset paint the ocean in copper and rose, I thought about everything that had happened: the betrayal, the trial, the verdict, the slow, painful rebuild. People asked if I'd forgiven my parents. The answer was complicated. Some days I was angry. Some days I was sad. Some days I just felt neutral. Forgiveness wasn't a switch you flipped. It was a process, ongoing, imperfect. But I'd learned something crucial. You could hold people accountable and still have compassion. You could set boundaries and still leave a door cracked open. You could protect yourself and still hope people changed. I'd placed a new plaque at Villa Rosa's entrance, the Margaret Sullivan Villas, built with love, preserved with strength. Below, a quote from her letter: "Real wealth isn't what you own, it's who loves you when you have nothing." I touched the plaque, whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." Behind me, Elena called that tomorrow's guests were arriving early. Life continued, complicated, imperfect, but honest. They'd tried to steal the villas. They'd failed. But in losing them, they'd had a chance to find something more valuable: themselves. Whether they took that chance was up to them. But me? I'd already found what I was looking for. I'd found my strength, my purpose, my peace. And in this place my grandmother loved, I'd found home.